For decades, they told us it was about national security. Every time a researcher filed a Freedom of Information request, every time a historian asked to see the files, every time a family demanded answers about what happened to their loved one, the answer was always the same. We can't tell you. It would compromise sources and methods. We can't tell you. It's still classified. We can't tell you. Trust us. And for years, most people did. But here's what they didn't count on. Paper doesn't burn forever. Secrets have a half-life. And eventually, the truth comes out. Not because the government wants you to know, but because the law finally catches up with them. What I'm about to tell you is the story of the largest declassification in American history. Millions of pages, decades of secrets. And what they reveal is not just what the government was hiding from its enemies, it's what they were hiding from us. From mind control experiments on unwitting Americans, from assassination plots they swore never happened, from the systematic destruction of evidence to keep you from ever knowing the truth. This is the secret history the US government tried to delete. Let me take you back to 1995. The Cold War is over. The Soviet Union has collapsed. And President Bill Clinton signs an executive order that changes everything. Executive Order 12,958. It sounds bureaucratic. It sounds boring. But here's what it did. It declared that after 25 years, most government secrets would automatically become not secrets anymore. Think about that for a moment. For the first time in American history, the default assumption shifted from keep it secret forever to release it unless there's a really, really good reason not to. The government created something called the Interagency Security Classification Appeals Panel, ISCAP, a panel of representatives from the State Department, the Defense Department, the National Security Council, the CIA, and the National Archives. Their job? To hear appeals from people who wanted secrets released. And here's the astonishing part. When people appealed, ISCAP ordered declassification more than 80% of the time. 80%. That means for decades, agencies had been classifying documents not because they needed to, but because they could, because no one was asking, because the default was hide it, and no one ever said, prove to me why this needs to stay secret. When that changed, the floodgates opened. Documents from the Kennedy administration, the Eisenhower administration, the Johnson administration, papers about nuclear weapons in Europe, diplomatic cables from the Six-Day War, intelligence assessments about Vietnam, all of it released. But those were just the beginning, because the deepest, darkest secrets weren't in diplomatic cables. They were in programs with code names that sounded like science fiction. And those documents, they weren't released because of any executive order. They were released because someone fought for them. Let me tell you about the most sensitive document in the entire US government, the President's Daily Brief, the PDB. Every single day, the intelligence community prepares a summary of the most vital information the President needs to know. Threats, opportunities, secrets that only a handful of people are allowed to see. For decades, the CIA's position was absolute. These documents would never be released. Not after 25 years, not after 50 years, never. They claimed a blanket policy of keeping them classified forever. Then, in 2004, a professor named Larry Berman filed a Freedom of Information request for 2 specific PDBs from the Johnson administration. The CIA said no, so he sued. The case went all the way to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and in 2007, the court delivered a ruling that shook the intelligence community. They rejected the CIA's claim of total exemption from FOIA. The agency had to start releasing. In September 2015, the CIA did something unprecedented. They released 2,500 President's Daily Briefs from the Kennedy and Johnson administrations at an event at the Lyndon B. Johnson Presidential Library. The CIA director himself stood there and talked about transparency. Listen to what he said. The PDB is among the most sensitive and classified documents in all of our government. The release of these documents affirms that the world's greatest democracy doesn't keep secrets merely for secrecy's sake. There was irony in that statement, because the CIA had fought tooth and nail for years to keep those exact documents from the public. But the release happened, and historians suddenly had access to a treasure trove, the actual intelligence reports that shaped the decisions of 2 American presidents during the most dangerous years of the Cold War. The Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis, Vietnam. All of it, in the words written for the Commander-in-Chief. But even as those documents came out, another fight was brewing. because the PDBs were just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the surface lay programs so dark, so unethical, so fundamentally wrong that the people who ran them had tried to destroy all evidence. They almost succeeded. 1953, the height of the Cold War. The United States is terrified that the Soviets have figured out something we haven't. Mind control, brainwashing, the ability to reprogram a human being against their will. So the CIA does what the CIA does. They start their own program. They call it MKULTRA. For 2 decades, under this code name, the CIA conducted experiments that would be illegal today, and frankly, should have been illegal then. They tested drugs on unwitting subjects. They used hypnosis to try to create programmable assassins. They gave people LSD without their knowledge and watched what happened. One of the most disturbing cases involves a scientist named Frank Olson. Olson worked for the CIA's Biological Weapons Division. In November 1953, his colleagues gave him LSD in a glass of Cointreau without telling him. They said it was part of an experiment. 9 days later, Olson was dead, falling from a 13th floor window of a New York hotel. The official ruling was suicide, but his family never believed it. Decades later, when the family finally got access to records, they learned the truth about the LSD. They also learned that the CIA had lied to them for years. Frank Olson's body was exhumed in 1994. The autopsy showed injuries consistent with a fall, but also evidence that suggested he might have been pushed. The case remains officially unresolved, and Olson was just one victim. In Kentucky, a patient was given LSD for 179 consecutive days as part of an experiment. In Canada, psychiatrist Dr. Ewan Cameron, funded by the CIA, subjected patients to psychic driving, weeks of sensory deprivation, massive doses of LSD, and recorded messages played repeatedly through headphones. Some of his patients emerged with their memories permanently damaged, their personalities shattered. In San Francisco, the CIA ran safe houses where prostitutes would bring clients who were secretly dosed with LSD, while government researchers watched from behind one-way mirrors. They called it Operation Midnight Climax. And here's the part that should make your blood run cold. In 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of all MKUltra records. 20,000 documents. Gone, shredded, burned, erased. Helms wasn't trying to protect sources and methods. He was trying to protect the CIA from accountability. He was trying to make sure no one would ever know what they'd done, but he didn't get all of them. Some records survived: financial documents, personnel files, papers that had been misfiled or overlooked. And in the 1970s, when the Church Committee began investigating intelligence abuses, those documents started to surface. By then, it was too late to hide. In 2024, just last year, the National Security Archive published a new collection of over 1,200 MKUltra documents. 70 years after Frank Olson was dosed with LSD, the truth keeps coming out. Because once a secret is written down, it never really dies. It just waits. Dallas, Texas. President John F. Kennedy is shot dead while riding in a motorcade. The nation mourns, the world watches, and the government begins to lie. Not necessarily about who killed him, though that's debatable, but about what they knew, when they knew it, and what they did with that knowledge. For 60 years, the JFK assassination has been the most scrutinized event in American history. And for 60 years, the government has been fighting to keep secrets about it. In 1992, Congress passed the JFK Records Act. It ordered that all assassination-related records be housed in a single collection at the National Archives. And it set a deadline. All records would be released by October 2017, unless the president certified that continued secrecy was necessary to protect against identifiable harm to national security. The deadline came and went. Trump was president. He delayed some releases. Biden delayed others. Then, in January 2025, Trump signed a new executive order, his first week back in office. He ordered the release of all remaining JFK files, along with records related to the assassinations of Robert F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. On March 18, 2025, the National Archives posted over 1,100 files, more than 80,000 pages. The Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, put out a statement. President Trump is ushering in a new era of maximum transparency. Promises made, promises kept. But here's what's fascinating. Even with 80,000 pages released, questions remain. The FBI had just discovered 2,400 new records, about 14,000 pages. that had never been submitted to the JFK Assassination Records Review Board. Those are still being processed. Hundreds of records related to grand jury proceedings and tax returns remain under seal, requiring court orders to release. And then, there's the CIA. Jefferson Morley, a longtime JFK researcher, looked at the new release and noted, "The release does not include 2/3 of the promised files, nor any of 500+ IRS records, nor any of the 2,400 recently discovered FBI files." In other words, they released a lot, but they didn't release everything. Why? Because some secrets are so sensitive that even 60 years isn't enough time. Or maybe, just maybe, because those secrets would reveal not just what happened in Dallas, but what the government was doing that they never wanted us to know. The House Oversight Committee held hearings on the JFK files in May 2025. The task force chairwoman, Anna Paulina Luna, put it bluntly, "What Americans have come to understand about the assassination of President Kennedy has been mostly controlled and filtered through the assent and watchful gaze of federal agencies who have often resisted efforts to reveal the truth." One witness, a former staff member of the House Select Committee on Assassinations, testified about his experience with the CIA. "When we first started, we had unlimited, unexpurgated access. Pretty much went to work there every morning. We'd ask for a file, they would go get it, we would review it. It was unredacted and given to us in its original state. After they brought George Joannides in, he began slowly tightening down the process. We started experiencing significant delays in the files that we would get. We started noticing the files we would get have obvious things missing from them." George Joannides was a CIA officer, and for decades, the CIA hid his connection to the JFK case. The head of the Assassination Records Review Board later said the CIA had deliberately misled his board about what files existed, 60 years, and they're still hiding. But here's the thing about declassification. It's not a single event. It's a process, and the process isn't over. Every time a new batch of files drops, researchers dig through them. They find things, they connect dots, they ask new questions, and the government keeps releasing, because once the law is on the side of transparency, secrecy becomes harder and harder to defend. The JFK files are just one example, but they're the most famous example, because everyone knows that something happened in Dallas, and everyone suspects that the full story hasn't been told. The question is, when will it be? Let me tell you another story the government tried to delete. After World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union raced to capture German scientific talent, rockets, jets, chemical weapons, the men who built Hitler's war machine. The US program was called Operation Paperclip. Between 1945 and 1959, over 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians were brought to America. They worked on rockets that would eventually take us to the moon. They developed jet aircraft. They contributed to chemical and biological weapons programs. Sounds like smart competition, right? Beating the Soviets to the best minds. Here's the part they didn't tell you. Many of these men were not just scientists. They were Nazis, active members of the Nazi Party, SS officers, men who had used slave labor in their factories, men who had experimented on concentration camp prisoners. Wernher von Braun became an American hero. He's on TV. He's in magazines. He's the face of the space program. But Wernher von Braun was also a member of the Nazi Party and an SS officer. His rockets were built by slave laborers from the Mittelbau-Dora concentration camp, where thousands died. Kurt de Boos, another paperclip scientist, became the first director of NASA's Kennedy Space Center, also a former SS officer. The government knew who these men were. They had files, they had evidence, and they buried it. Why? Because the Cold War demanded it. Because the Soviets were getting their own German scientists. Because we needed to win. And so the Nazis became Americans. Their pasts were erased. Their files were sealed. For decades, the full extent of Operation Paperclip remained classified. Researchers had to fight for every document. Families of victims had to fight for the truth about what happened to their loved ones. Today, many of those files are declassified. We know the names. We know the crimes. We know the cover-up. But here's the question that remains. How many other secrets are still buried? How many other uncomfortable truths are waiting for someone to file the right FOIA request, to bring the right lawsuit, to ask the right question? Now let me take you somewhere truly strange. The 1970s. The Cold War is still raging, and someone in the intelligence community has a wild idea. What if the Soviets have psychic spies? What if they're using remote viewing? The ability to see distant places with the mind, to steal our secrets. It sounds absurd. It sounds like science fiction. But the US government spent millions of dollars investigating it. Project Stargate. For over 2 decades, the CIA and the Defense Intelligence Agency funded research into psychic phenomena. They tested self-proclaimed psychics like Uri Geller, who famously bent spoons on TV. The declassified files are surreal. In one test, Geller was asked to describe a concealed drawing. According to CIA documentation, his almost immediate response was that he saw a cylinder with noise coming out of it. They called it remote viewing. They trained military officers to do it. They spent millions. And in the end, they concluded it offered no strategic benefit. The Stargate files were declassified in the 1990s and 2000s. You can read them today. They're a monument to how desperate the Cold War made us, how willing we were to believe anything, to try anything, to gain any advantage over an enemy we barely understood. But they're also proof that declassification works. These documents, strange, embarrassing, absurd, are public now. Anyone can see them. Anyone can judge for themselves what the government was doing with their tax dollars. That's transparency. And it didn't happen because the government wanted to be transparent. It happened because people pushed, because researchers filed FOIA requests, because journalists kept asking questions, because the law eventually caught up with the secrets. That's how declassification works. Not through goodwill, through persistence. Now, let me show you the pattern. Because the stories I've told you, MKULTRA, the JFK files, Operation Paperclip, Project Stargate, they're not exceptions, they're examples. The pattern is always the same. Step 1. Create the secret. A program is launched, a document is written, a decision is made. Someone, somewhere, stamps it. Classified. Step 2. Defend the secret. Years pass, decades pass. The original reasons for classification fade. The people involved retire or die. But the secret remains because no one has challenged it. Step 3. Fight to keep it secret. Someone files a FOIA request. Someone sues. The government fights back, not because the secret still matters, but because admitting it doesn't matter would mean admitting they were wrong to keep it for so long. Step 4. Release. But not everything. Documents come out, but heavily redacted, or with entire pages missing, or years after they were supposed to be released. The government calls it transparency. Researchers call it a tease. Step 5. The truth trickles out. Over time, more documents are released, more pieces of the puzzle emerge. Historians piece together what happened. The public finally learns. But here's the catch. By the time the truth is out, it's usually too late to do anything about it. The victims of MKULTRA are dead or elderly. The assassinations are half a century in the past. The Nazi scientists have already built their rockets and died as American heroes. Secrecy isn't just about keeping information hidden. It's about running out the clock. If you can keep a secret for 50 years, the people who could have done something about it are gone. The statute of limitations has expired. The scandal has lost its power. That's not a bug. That's a feature. Declassification isn't a gift. It's a grudging admission that the game is up. So here's the question that should haunt you. What are they hiding now? Because for every document that's been declassified, there are thousands that haven't. For every program we know about, there are dozens we don't. The 25-year automatic declassification rule sounds good in theory, but in practice, agencies have endless ways to delay. They claim exemptions, they cite sources and methods, they say release would harm national security. Sometimes they're telling the truth, sometimes they're not, and we have no way to know which is which. The JFK files are still coming out 60 years later. The MKULTRA files are still coming out 70 years later. The Cold War documents are still being reviewed 30 years after the Soviet Union collapsed. At this rate, the secrets of the 1990s won't be fully public until the 2050s. The secrets of 9/11 won't be public until the 2060s. The secrets of today won't be public until most of us are dead. That's not transparency. That's delayed accountability. And delayed accountability is just another word for no accountability at all. Because if no one faces consequences for what happened, what difference does it make that we finally know? The files sit in archives. The historians write their papers. The documentaries get made. But the victims? They're gone. The perpetrators? They died without answering for what they did. The system that protected them? It's still running, still classifying, still hiding. That's the real secret. Not any single document, not any single program. The real secret is that the system is designed to protect itself, and it's very, very good at it. But here's the thing about secrets. They're fragile. They depend on silence. They depend on nobody asking. They depend on everybody assuming that someone else is watching. And the moment someone starts asking questions, the whole thing starts to crack. Every declassified document I've told you about exists because someone asked. Someone filed a FOIA request. Someone sued. Someone spent years pushing against a system designed to push back. Larry Berman, the professor who sued for the PDBs. John Marks, the former State Department official who spent decades compiling MKULTRA documents. Jefferson Morley, the journalist who keeps digging through JFK files. The families of Frank Olson, who never stopped asking what happened to their father and husband. They didn't accept classified as an answer. They didn't trust the government to tell them what they needed to know. And because they didn't, we know things we weren't supposed to know. That's the power of persistence. Secrets don't like sunlight. They don't like questions. They don't like people who won't go away. And eventually, if you keep pushing, the sun coming. Not all at once. Not completely. Not without a fight. But it comes. They thought if they burned enough paper, buried enough files, waited long enough, the truth would die. But truth doesn't die. It just waits for someone to ask the right question and refuse to stop asking until they get an answer.